There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, I am delighted to welcome a Instagram bookish contact, bookish friend to the Bite Size Book Chats, Elena from San Diego. Welcome, Elena.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I don't remember who started following who, but I have recently started following a lot of people just so that I can mine Instagram for interesting guests for this series. And I think that's how I found you. And
Yeah.
you wrote recently a review of a memoir of somebody that I'd never heard of, but you wrote such an interesting review that I contacted you and you said yes. And we have had a comedy of errors of scheduling issues to make this interview happen. And here we are. And how lovely to have you here. So the book is called Period Piece, and it's by Gwen Raverat, who was a famous British wood engraver, and it was published in 1952. Tell us more, Elena.
Actually, this book has never been out of publication. It has gone through several cycles, and it's a lovely, quaint, sort of cozy memoir. It's very reflective, and it's kind of odd because I know it says it's a memoir about Gwen Raverat, but it's actually more about the people in her life that influenced her. It's very little about her, actually. There's whole chapters in here about specific family members and things like that.
And I believe that she comes from a rather famous family. Yeah. Do you care to share who her grandfather was?
So her grandfather is Charles Darwin, famous naturalist, and he's actually her paternal grandfather. And there's a lot in here about his siblings, although he actually died before she was born, so they didn't really have any kind of relationship, sadly. But yeah, that's kind of what drew me to the book initially. I started reading it for a book club, actually a YouTube book club, but I really enjoyed it a lot.
We do need to give one bit of a content warning. We're not going to make too much of it, but we're going to make people aware. Would you like to describe that?
There is I hesitate to even call it a paragraph. It's a few sentences that were, so she's recalling her mother saying that's kind of a racist comment of the time, unfortunately.
Well, and I think probably at that time nobody would have batted an eye, but these days it would be considered quite racist. And you said, one or two sentences, so we're not going to dwell on it, but it's there and people should know that.
Yeah.
And that there's nothing else like that in the book, right?
There is not, no, nothing at all.
Okay, so what else is in the book? Were you familiar with her art before you started reading the book?
I was not. I had no idea who this was. And when I started reading the book and I realized that she was an artist, I thought she was an author, but this is actually the only book she's ever written. There are other books that contain her art, but there's nothing, of the written word.
There's quite a bit of her art printed in the book, right?
Yes, there's quite a bit of it in there.
And I'm going to put some gifs up while we're talking so people can get a sense of her art. It's quite wonderful.
Great. Book is called Period Piece, and it's a Cambridge childhood is what the little tagline is, and it's exactly that. It really talks about her family, a lot about her mother, not very much about her father, but he is in there a little bit, and mostly how her family and the people that she came to know influenced her childhood and mostly memories of her childhood.
And apparently at Cambridge in the UK, there is a college called Darwin College. And this is according to her Wikipedia page. It occupies both her childhood home, Newnham Grange, and the neighboring Old Granary, which is a district apparently, where she lived from 1946 until her death. So all of those places that she lived, where she was born and where she spent the end of her life, it's all part of the Darwin College grounds at the University of Cambridge. So very much of a Cambridge memoir.
Yes, that's what I understand. It doesn't really talk about her adult life at all. It really is all about her childhood. It's very slice of life. It's everything from cooking to clothes to etiquette, all of those kind of fun little cozy things a small child would remember.
And I have two questions that I'm going to kind of merge into one. So one question would be, why do you think this book has never been out of print? And then the second question would be, what did you like about it? Because I think the answer might be the same for both.
I think that this memoir has a real sort of specific charm to it that I haven't really found in a lot of other memoirs that I've read of people during this time period. You really get a sense of place. She was sort of on the upper echelons of her society. Sure. She wasn't like very rich, but she was very upper middle class. And so all the talk about parties and dinner parties and the sort of things that mattered to women during the day is just very charming and very, you can really see it when you're reading it. And I think that's part of why it's never gone out of print, because it's a very easy read and you could really picture what you're reading.
And she and her husband, they were friends with Virginia Woolf. Does Virginia Woolf show up in the memoir?
She does not. She met Virginia Woolf while she was in college. There's actually a book called Virginia Woolf and the Raverats, and it's by William Pryor, who I believe is her grandson.
I see that. That is true, that he is her grandson, and it's that publication is listed among several others on her Wikipedia page. So yes. Are you a Virginia Woolf fan?
I yes and no. We have a complicated relationship.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay.
But some of her work is among my favorite, and others just can't get my head around. So did this memoir remind you of any other books you've read?
Not really. No, it almost reads like a novel.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's high praise.
Yeah, it really does, considering that it's her first and only try at writing.
This was published in 1962 and has been continuously in print. I would like to see a list of what other memoirs printed in 1962 have been in print ever since. I think it would be a very short list. And then I would like to whittle it down to memoirs by wood engravers published in the decade of the 1960s that are still in print. I bet you it's the only one. I would be willing to bet $100. So this is quite an interesting phenomenon. It's publication history as well.
Yes, and well-deserved. Absolutely well-deserved.
Well, you've definitely sold me, and I'm so glad to have found someone that reads books off the beaten track like this. So I hope you'll come back, Elena.
I would love to.
Well, this is a special treat for her first time appearing on Bite-Sized Book Chats, but it's maybe her third or 13th or 23rd appearance on my channel. The Irish novelist Cauvery Madhavan joining us from Ireland today. Cauvery, hello.
Hi, Sean. Good morning. Always great to be here chatting with you because you're a true book lover.
Well,
and writers appreciate true book lovers.
Well, right back at you. I'm delighted to see you, and we're going to have you back hopefully early next year for a longer chat. But for today, we're here for a bite-sized book chat about a novel that I've never heard of. I've never heard of the author. I've never heard of the book. So this is exciting for me. It is called 10 Days by Austin Duffy, and it was it just published this year?
It was published earlier this year.
Yeah. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so I mean, I would never have come across this book, but this is one of the advantages of being in a book club. You know, you get to know books that you wouldn't have normally read or that you may not have come across. This book, I absolutely loved it, Sean. So when you asked me to, come and have a bite-sized chat, I couldn't think of a better book to talk about and to encourage people to read. So the writer is Austin Duffy. He is an oncologist, quite a well-known oncologist in one of the leading hospitals in Dublin. And this is his second book. His first book, his debut novel, actually was shortlisted for the Keri Novel of the Year award when it came out 2 years ago, I think. I think it came out 2 years ago, yeah. And it's called This Living and Immortal Thing, and again, published by Granta. 10 Days, it's just the most unusual and wonderful read. The story is about Woolf Mateus, who comes back into the life of his wife and 16-year-old daughter a year before his wife dies of cancer. I'm not giving anything away. This is how the story starts. Right. And he kind of waltzed out of their life when the daughter, Ruth, was 7 years old, and comes back a year before his wife Miriam dies of cancer. And the story starts 2 weeks after Miriam dies. And, she's of Jewish faith, and she's from New York, and she wants, very contrary to, Jewish tradition, she wants to be cremated, and she wants her ashes scattered in the Hudson River. So he heads off with his daughter to New York. The relationship between the father and the daughter is so beautifully described, because she has no time for him. She's very scathing as to why and how he disappeared from their lives and then appeared again. Like, he didn't disappear in the sense that, he left them, kept in touch, but left them. She's your typical 16-year-old daughter, has 16-year-old girl, and has no time for her father, and sort of is very exasperated really by him. Anyway, they head off to New York, and, the story unfolds.
Totally sounds like a Sean book. I'm already feeling a little bit verklempt about the opening premise. Now, he left the family when this daughter was, did you say 7?
Yeah, seven.
And
that's
now,
right. Yeah.
Now she's 16. So about a decade has passed.
The book opens with, and you get the understanding that he is taking his daughter Ruth to New York. He doesn't intend bringing her back. You start the book saying, he's taking a 16-year-old. He hasn't told her that she's never going to become, that he's leaving her in New York. And you just think, what the hell? How could he do this? And why is he doing this? There's also then the story of cross-cultural aspect, because his in-laws, Miriam's parents and Miriam's family, were very, very disapproving when she married him. He's not Jewish. It's also the interaction between him and her family, and the fact that she wanted to be, that she's been cremated. That they just can't get their heads around that, and they're so unhappy. She left the Jewish tradition as far as funerals are concerned. The book is so unusual in that as you're reading it, you come across repetitions. The book is being told from a third person point of view, from Woolf Mateus's point of view. And suddenly you find, he's quite incoherent, and you just think, oh my God, the writers lost the plot, Austin Duffy has lost the plot. But actually, no, Austin Duffy is weaving a really, really incredible story. And in all those sudden falterings and repetitions, some weird third person stuff that, you wonder what's going on, but it's all actually part of the story. It's part of the reason why he wants to leave his daughter in New York. Sean, you will absolutely love this book.
You just gave me a chill with that last part. And it also, have you read the Booker winning novel this year, The Promise by Damon Galgut?
No, I haven't. No,
because there's a lot in what you've described that's very similar. Obviously, that one is a South African story, but it opens with the death of the mother, and she is Jewish, and her husband and all his family are not. They're Afrikaner, and there's a very similar conflict about where what the funeral is going to be like, or where she will be buried, or any of that at the opening. And he also does a lot of really strange and wonderful things with point of view. So
and it's a book that has haunted me since I've read it. I'm going to be 60 in January myself, and
16.
Oh, Sean, you start writing your fiction there. But it's a book that makes you think about your own mortality. Right. And what way are you going to go, and what lies ahead, and how you would cope with what life might throw at you. There's a good bit about faith, about the Jewish faith, and about Jewish orthodoxy, because the daughter Ruth has a kind of a newfound interest in the Jewish religion, and the father just can't quite understand how a young modern woman, would lean towards such an orthodox way of thinking. It starts off in London, but literally as it starts off, they're taking off on a flight to New York. His intent to leave her in New York is apparent very, very quickly, and then you're kind of drawn into the book because you want to know why. Why does he want to? Why does he want to leave her with family that she's never met? She doesn't know them. It's a fantastic book. I really, really loved it.
it's also hearkening back to what was you recommended a book when you and Ronan came on and recommended some Irish books, and you recommended one that was about it was the reverse situation where her mother died in America and then she went to Ireland.
Oh yes, Una. Yes, yeah. Alice Lyons.
Alice Lyons.
Yeah,
so those also would be an interesting pairing. And I am really drawn to fiction that's about death and dying and all of these questions. So yeah, it does sound like a Sean book, and you have sold it very well. And I expected nothing less, and you have delivered. Thank you for coming on and telling us all about it, Cauvery. You'll come back, I hope.
100%.
I am delighted to welcome, for her first and hopefully not her last appearance on Bite Size Book Chats, the writer Laura Bogart from the East Coast of the United States of America. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're here, and this interview will go up right away. We're here for in a way, a sad occasion, because the New Zealand writer Keri Hulme just passed away, I believe 2 days ago. And I'm actually going to share this story because I retweeted the article announcing the obituary or whatever, and somebody who follows me retweeted it, and then Laura saw that retweet and commented on it, and here we are for a bite-sized book chat because of all that tweeting about her Booker Prize winning, is it 1985 novel?
I think so. Yeah, it was early 80s, early to mid 80s.
I believe it's 1985 novel, The Bone People.
Oh, 84. So it was published in 84, February, and won the Booker Prize in 1985.
There you go. All right. And I didn't know until about 5 minutes ago that Laura Bogart is herself a novelist. Her debut novel came out. The timing wasn't that great. I think it came out the day of the lockdown in the United States or something in 2020. Please give us your elevator pitch for your somewhat new novel, Laura.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, so my novel is called Don't You Know I Love You, and it came out from Desank Books. And it is really about a young woman who comes from a father who is violent but charismatic, and who struggles with her own definitions of what is family, what is love, what is power. And at the same time, she's trying to unpack that in a personal way. She is also learning to become an artist in the world and what that means to her. And so it really is about, the way I've couched it and framed it is, it's sort of like if you like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Rebel Without a Cause and a taste of The Bone People, which was very influential on the book, like this is for you.
It sounds really interesting. Tell us about The Bone People. I have not read it, and I want you to sell it to me and all of my viewers.
Okay, so The Bone People is sort of a labor of love for this author. And if you love persistence stories, this one is for you, because she wrote this book. She'd been working as like a tobacco farmer and pitched it out for 12 years before it was finally picked up by a small press and then became massively successful. It won the Booker Prize in 1985, and it was actually the first writer. She won as the first writer with a debut novel. And also
the first New Zealand writer.
First New Zealand writer, yeah. And so the book is this beautiful, challenging, emotionally provocative and raw story. And it's sort of this triptych of these people. And the main character, if you want to call her that, is this woman named Kerwin Holmes, who is a self-prescribed hermit. She lives in this giant kind of spiral-shaped tower near the coast. It's beautifully described. The house is gorgeous. It has anything she could ever need. And she thinks she's sort of content in her isolation. And she discovers this young boy who is sort of this mute feral child and has this foster father who is a Maori man named Joe. And, this is a big part of the plot of The Bone People. And, any description you will see is Joe is completely overwhelmed by the burdens of single parenting. He's lost his wife, and other child. He lashes out and can be quite violent with Simon. And at the same time, they're forming this sort of family unit with Kerwin, and Kerwin is coming out of her own shell and her own isolation and trying to sort of temper the relationship between the father and the son. But she's no pushover. She is quite stern, quite powerful, quite confident. She's a very radical figure. If your audience is like really unorthodox women characters, she is that. She's one of the few asexual women characters that I've ever encountered in fiction. And at one point, Joe tries to kind of bring her in a more conventional family mode. And she's like, that's not going to happen here. What I can offer you is my friendship. It's very much a book about family and friendship. At the same time, it's really getting into some of these meaty things about thin lines between violence and passion, family as being a source of support, and family is being made to feel kind of like a smothering force. And it really does some very provocative kind of examinations of gender in the story. There's Kerwin, who, like I said, is very unique. Also a character who sort of wears her cynicism and her isolation on her sleeve, but has this sort of fundamental goodness to her. And in Joe, she's really looking at what happens when you have a male character who can't express his feelings, who has no outlet for really difficult, uncomfortable feelings until they absolutely explode. And there are things from his past that I won't get into so your readers can see for yourself. But because this man has had no way to talk about some of the traumas from his past, it explodes into these sort of violent moments. So she's really looking at sort of generational trauma and interpersonal trauma too. It is ultimately, I think, just a very redemptive story. And I've never read anything like it since, honestly. I've never read anything like it. I encountered it when I was a MFA student in DC, and that would have been in like 2005.
It really sounds interesting. So Kerwin herself is mixed race, right? She's part Maori,
Yes.
part European. And
Yes.
The Joe guy is full Maori, right?
Yes.
And then do we know anything? Is it relevant what the ethnicity of Simon is?
It is, in that it's Joe struggles. Joe loves his son in a way, but also struggles with feelings of full connectedness to his son, because his foster son is this blonde-haired, blue-eyed kind of imp. And there is some mystery about where Simon came from. That is part of what animates the book to a big degree, because Simon himself comes from, significant amounts of trauma, even before he's adopted into this.
And so far, nothing that I can see in the blurb or from your very evocative description gives me any sense of time. What's the temporal setting for this? Is it way back in the past, or is it?
My interpretation, so she would have written this. It's published in 1984, and like we said, she shipped it around for 12 years. And so obviously she's writing this, at some point in the 70s. And I think the thing that is so remarkable about what she does is it's like, I'm sure that there are references and things that are very specific to the time period where she's writing it. Obviously nobody has a cell phone. Nobody, people are still using, they're walking to the pub to phone somebody, and, these things matter. But there is a timelessness about the book. So that is one of the things that I think really weathers the test of the book is that it could be any time.
And you were devastated to hear about Keri passing. So tell us about the meaning of this book for you.
It was a big influence on my own novel, Don't You Know I Love You? Because I think when we think about difficult relationships or, situations of domestic violence, we always tend to think of them in very kind of black and white and binary terms. And I want to be really careful and say that This book does not let Joe off the hook for the things that he does to Simon. It is very clear that what he does is wrong and that he is a man who needs to, basically get his stuff together and heal himself. But I think when we think about those, the way that these sorts of things are framed, or that there is never any semblance of love or attraction or affection in those relationships, at least in their onset, we find a way to sort of blame victims and survivors, because it's sort of like saying, how did you not know this was bad? Were you an idiot for staying? That sort of thing. And I think in the way that she takes a really complex, nuanced look and treats these people as characters, as people, as entities breathing in a book, and not necessarily like, I'm going to make a big capital point, but I'm going to use what happens here to explore these things in ways that are thoughtful and complex, and at the same time very aware of like who is culpable in this situation and who is the one that needs to change. This novel is very unapologetic about its own complexity and the kind of different shades of moral gray.
Sounds absolutely emotionally complex and, well, I don't want to plagiarize too much from the blurb, but mesmerizing. I'm mesmerized by your description of it. So thank you for telling us about it. I would like to welcome to my channel a fairly new booktuber, certainly new to me, that I just fell in love with this channel as soon as I watched the first 3 minutes of one of his videos. Brandon from Nebraska, and his channel is Brandon's Bookshelf. Welcome, Brandon.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
How long have you had your channel?
2 weeks. Very, very new.
Only 2 weeks. Oh my goodness. I thought it was longer, but I thought it might be a month or so. So yeah. So please give us your elevator pitch. I know you've got a trailer. I'll put a link to your channel, of course.
Yes, thank you. I'm still finding my voice of what I want the channel to be, but I'm very excited to have very in-depth reviews. A lot of the ones I've done so far have been in the 30 to 40 minute range. I'm also trying to do some shorter ones for those of us with smaller attention spans. And I think I'll get into the tags. I like watching those. I think it's interesting to get to know the individuals better, but I definitely want the preference to be on the books and the authors.
Absolutely. The beauty of tags is that's how people on BookTube find you.
Yes.
So it's really good and they're fun, and you can choose the ones that kind of resonate for you. Now, I'm curious if you do have long video reviews and then short ones. Do you just edit the long one down, or do you do a separate short review?
No, I keep the intro. That's it. And then after I've gone through the long one and I feel I have my bearings of everything I want to cover, I do a new video and try to condense it. But it is different material.
That's very time consuming and very admirable. Good for you. So we are here to talk about a somewhat obscure work of Indigenous history. The title is Walk Softly, This is God's Country. 66 years on the Wind River Indian Reservation. And then it goes on, compiled from the letters and journals of the Reverend John Roberts, 1883 to 1949, by Eleanor Roberts Markley. Huh? Is that right?
Yes.
Co-author?
Well, it's interesting. So a lot of people get credit. You've got the Reverend, and it's his journals that the book is based off of. And his daughter started collecting and condensing the journals. And then her daughter, so his granddaughter, is the one who actually took it to publication. So Elinore is the daughter and Beatrice is the granddaughter.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. I mentioned the daughter then, Eleanor Roberts Markley, and the granddaughter is Beatrice Crofts. And I'm going to stop talking and let you tell us about this book.
Sure. So let me know if you need to stop me at some point here, because I might run away with it. But the book is interesting. It's a little divisive, and I'll talk about that. But the gist of the book is this. He was a missionary. So at age 21, he gets commissioned to go to the reservation up in Wyoming and to minister and educate the two Native American tribes and communities that live there. So you've got the Shoshones and the Arapahos. Wyoming is in kind of the northwest part of the United States. And it's interesting because it's just on the edge of the plains. So you've got the mountain Native Americans like the Arapaho and the plains Indians like the Shoshone. And they were put together on this reservation within 10 years of each other, even though they were warring factions in their natural state. So of course, the US government didn't care about that. Grant had just created this new peace policy where he actually turned over management of these reservations to the religious denominations and charged them with educating and culturalizing these native populations. And so what's fascinating and the good part of this book is that he learned their language, he learned their customs, the Reverend. He did an accurate job of transcribing what was important to them in their language and in English. So we get a really accurate look. What is not so great is the fandom from his daughter and granddaughter and the indoctrination they clearly had as they told the story of Native Americans past and then after their father's influence. You can tell that there might have been something not fair there.
So kind of paternalistic and colonialist.
Yes, both of those things, to put it mildly.
To put it mildly, and less so in the actual missionaries' perspective.
I found that. I think
that's fascinating.
I think for all intents and purposes, he spent 66 years, his entire life, 21 to 87 years old. He spent and dragged his family, not dragged his family, created his family there and kept them there in a very remote, very harsh environment, especially at that time and especially in that part of the United States. And so he just seems to have really had obviously an agenda religiously, but aside from that, a good heart towards these people and a respect for them. His journaling seems to reflect that much more so than his daughters or granddaughters.
That is really interesting. Do we know how the Shoshone or Arapaho Native Americans feel about him today?
Yeah, that's interesting. It seems to be, there was a lot of influence from one of the main chiefs, Washiki, which is actually who the fort is named after. And he lived to a very long age. I think he died at 97. And he died a Christian after converting due to a very serious encounter with this reverend after his son had died. And his influence really trickled down after that on the reservation in terms of converting other Native people to Christianity. And so within that faction, you have great respect and love for this missionary, which makes sense as they've been converted. There is also more original or some of the Native people on the reservation who've held on to their culture more so than converting that feel, from what I've been able to read and understand, maybe an imbalance with that. So even within the population there, it's split, right? Which is so interesting.
I don't think we have established, or I certainly haven't. I'm not aware. When was the book originally published?
Just find it here very quickly. The copyright is 97.
So we'll go with that. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not that old. This sounds really interesting to me. What would be some things that it left you thinking about or that you got out of it?
For one, I think Americans especially have this idea of grouping Native Americans together. They're all the same. They're Native people. They came before us. We took their land. We have this kind of story and framework that we've given ourselves. And what I have found through each book and experience is how individual these tribes are, like you would expect, of course, if you're really thinking about it. And I didn't know much about the Shoshone and the Arapaho. I'm from Nebraska, like you mentioned, and it's Great Plains, and we've got more of the Sioux. And there's 7 different factions of Sioux. And so that's been a large part of my study and understanding. But I went on a hiking trip in Wyoming to Wind River on the reservation, actually, and I wanted to understand these two tribes better. And so, the first great thing I would say about the book is getting a really personal experience with these cultures. What was different about them, what their hunts consisted of, what their religiosity looked like, what they believed, how they communicated, etc. And then, of course, it's just an excellent look into the horrors of how America treated, or how I should say, the government first established Native American policies. And it's such a pivotal point when reservations first got made. When they first got made and they're being managed, especially by the religious folk, it's such propaganda of we're doing this for them, we're culturalizing them, we're giving them the tools they need to succeed. There were no farms. Now look at the farms. There were no clothes. Now look at the clothes. And it's completely disregarding their culture and the fact they didn't care about that. That's not how they gave. That's not how they took. That's not how they lived. And that's really well said here throughout the book, I think.
That's fantastic. Brandon, are you aware of, or have you read the Aboriginal Australian novel, The Yield by Tara June Winch?
I have not.
Well, I recommend it very highly because it's my top read of this year.
Oh, excellent.
And it resonates so much with this book, this nonfiction book. It would be an excellent pairing because it has 3 strands. So transpose this kind of a story onto the Australian context. And there is a historical, it's a letter being written by the white Christian missionary who's living among and trying to do his best for the Aboriginal Australians under his care, and then present day narrative, and a dictionary that's being written by the grandfather of the present day character. Just as he was dying, he was trying to get a dictionary of this indigenous language that has a lot of his story embedded in the dictionary entries. But I think that you would really connect, especially with that one narrative, but the way it resonates with the other narratives, because it really reminds me of how you're describing this guy.
Oh, excellent. I'll add it immediately. That sounds great.
Yeah. Brandon, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.